Game of Thrones, Season 8, Episode 3. The Long Night. This was a big episode for book readers. There seems to be a lot of controversy around it. Apparently Episode 3 is getting low ratings. I see some of my book brethren completely disavowing the show. They're saying they ruined the story. This is not at all how it's going to happen in the books. It's a total letdown. It's fan fiction. So I thought I would respond to some of that. First, I totally get where they're coming from. Some of the things the TV show does feels almost like a deliberate insult to the source material. For me, the stories of Sansa and Arya have felt that way at times. But at the same time, any criticisms I might make against them are on shaky ground, because we don't have the last two books yet. We don't know how their story's gonna go, and it could have more in common with the show than I might think. And even if it doesn't turn out to have much in common with the books, it might paint any shortcuts that they took on the TV show in a new light. So I tend to reserve judgment on things, which is what I'm doing with Episode 3. The experience of watching Episode 3 was 10 out of 10 to me. Any holes I might be able to poke in the story afterward won't change that, because I can poke holes in anything, so there has to be a separate rating. How much did I enjoy watching it, and how much do I like what I took away from it? The first one's a 10. The second one might be a 7 or an 8. Still really good, but I'm a little disappointed that the threat seems to have been dealt with very quickly, and there wasn't much more going on. There wasn't much lost for the living, at least in comparison to my expectations. And I didn't learn more about the White Walkers, and their side of things. Imagine if, after Jaime pushed Bran out of the window, we never learned more about Jaime. He would just remain a one-note villain throughout the whole story. And we'd never learn that he was a hero who saved 1 million lives, and whose situation is more sympathetic than I initially thought. I'm pretty sure that Arya is supposed to kill the big bad guy in the books, too. Arya is my most researched character, and when I read her, I definitely get vibes like the author's forging a weapon. This is a girl that's heavily in contradiction with what I call the human life premise, that human life is the most valuable thing. And being in contradiction with it, that should warrant an unhappy ending for her. But then on the other hand, she's an 11-year-old kid, so it's hard for me to say that she really deserves an unhappy ending, being so young of a killer, and her story being so tragic because of her age. So when asked whether or not I think Arya is going to survive the story, the only answer I'm able to give is 50-50. I have no idea. I think it could go either way, and both would feel kind of right and kind of wrong. So if Martin is forging a weapon in Arya, by plunging her into the fires, so to speak, and hammering the shit out of her, then it makes sense that she would play a big role in defeating whatever bad guy is at the end of this. There are a lot of other things in Arya's story that lead me to believe that she's going to play a big role in the War for the Dawn. One is that she's the only other character, besides Howland Reed, who has seen the Isle of Faces, as far as I know. When other characters look at the God's Eye, they don't see the island. They see endless water. So I think the suggestion is that the island only reveals itself to certain people. Arya climbs a tree, looks out on the water, and sees the island. So that might indicate that she's special in some way that relates to the island. So if the others were created on that island, like they were in the show, then there's the connection. Another detail in support of Arya's role in the War for the Dawn is that my journey through Melisandre's Girl in Grey prophecy indicates to me that beyond a reasonable doubt, Arya's bound for the Wall, which suggests that she's going to survive long enough to make it that far, which adds a lot of credence to an Arya lives ending. So I think Arya defeating the threat of the others is probably legit in the books, but we'll see. Let's see, what's another criticism I've heard of Episode 3? Oh, some people don't like that Arya is Azor Ahai, and her dagger is Lightbringer. Well, I have good news. Arya isn't Azor Ahai, not even in the show. What she did doesn't match the legend. Nissa was a woman, first of all, and Azor was a man. They were also married. Nissa was also willing. The Night King wasn't willing. Arya hasn't captured a lion, or tried to forge a blade in its heart. She hasn't tried to forge a blade by plunging it through water either. There are too many pieces missing. You might say, well, the show isn't doing Azor Ahai completely. They're just doing the big parts of it. The big part being a blade through the heart to save the world. Here's the full Azor Ahai legend from the books, in case you want to keep an eye out for it in the show. I don't know if they're even going to do it in the show, but it's the biggest mystery in the books, so all the book nerds are watching for it. They also tend to conflate it with the prince that was promised. I think that might be a mistake. Anyway, here's the legend. Do you know the tale of the forging of Lightbringer? I shall tell it to you. It was a time when darkness lay heavy on the world. To oppose it, the hero must have a hero's blade. Oh, like none that had ever been. And so, for 30 days and 30 nights, Azor Ahai labored sleepless in the temple, forging a blade in the sacred fires. Heat and hammer and fold, heat and hammer and fold. Oh, yes, until the sword was done. Yet, when he plunged it into water to temper the steel, it burst asunder. Being a hero, it was not for him to shrug and go in search of excellent grapes such as these. So again he began. The second time, it took him 50 days and 50 nights. And this sword seemed even finer than the first. Azor Ahai captured a lion, to temper the blade by plunging it through the beast's red heart. But once more the steel shattered and split. Great was his woe, and great was his sorrow then, for he knew what he must do. 100 days and 100 nights he labored on the third blade, and as it glowed white-hot in the sacred fires, he summoned his wife. Nissa, Nissa, he said to her, for that was her name, bare your breast, and know that I love you best of all that is in this world. She did this thing. Why, I cannot say. And Azor Ahai thrust the smoking sword through her living heart. It is said that her cry of anguish and ecstasy left a crack across the face of the moon. But her blood and her soul and her strength and her courage all went into the steel. Such is the tale of the forging of Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes. There. Now everybody knows what we're looking for. So as you can see, there are a lot of moving parts in this prophecy. You might think, well, it's just a lot of superfluous details that don't matter. But that isn't how prophecies work. Every descriptive word and phrase in it is working overtime, and many, if not all of them, have at least 2 meanings. Since the Night King isn't a woman, and Arya isn't a man, I can't consider what happened in the show to be any version of the Lightbringer prophecy, in any interpretation of the words he and wife that I can think of. What other criticisms have I seen? Oh, we didn't learn what the others wanted. It was too shallow. There wasn't enough. Or it didn't matter enough what the White Walkers wanted. Yeah, I can agree with that. I got that feeling too. But I think I have to reserve judgment because the story isn't over yet. The threat might not be solved yet. I think there's a good chance that the three-eyed crow is the real threat. But we'll see. The beginning and the middle of a story has to be interpreted in the context of the ending, and vice versa. So without the ending, we don't know how to contextualize any of it. Or rather, all of our contextualizations are premature. Except, of course, for how much I enjoyed the experience of watching it, and for how it might inform my decision of whether or not I'm going to continue watching it. It's like those people who stopped watching after the Red Wedding. They said things like, "The story is nihilistic filth. It's tragedy for the sake of tragedy." Who wants to watch that? But without having seen the ending yet, their opinions about the story aren't opinions. They're prejudices. You can't have an opinion on something you haven't seen yet, which is the ending. If I were to close my eyes to anything that smacks of tragedy, I wouldn't even make it through a viewing of The Lion King. All of what I'm about to say might become irrelevant, as more information is revealed. But here's a lens through which I've been looking at the others White Walkers conflict. There are a lot of different types of conflicts that you can have in a story. There's man versus nature, man versus man. The Game of Thrones seems to be man versus man, and the War for the Dawn seems to be man versus nature, sort of. The White Walkers are sympathetic because they were forcibly created by the children of the forest, who had suffered at the hands of mankind. I think A Song of Ice and Fire often demonstrates that the cruelty of man far outstrips the cruelty of nature. We mourn when nature takes its death toll, but ultimately, we can bear the loss, because we know that there is a degree to which the conflict with nature is unavoidable. Nature's cruelty is not deliberate or personal. It's incidental. A wolf is as happy to eat a woman as a man, a goat as a child, and he won't make it a point to inflict more pain upon one than the other. As competitors ourselves, we know that, at the end of the day, we have the same motivations as the creatures that compete with us for primacy, and so there's a kinship in our conflict. If I ever feel that nature has betrayed me, the only reason I feel that way is because I wasn't paying close enough attention to nature. Nature does what it has always done. The horrible things that people inflict on other people are far more difficult for us to bear. Why is it said that there are none more accursed than the kinslayer? What is it exactly that compels us to crucify or burn one another, rather than beheading? At the root of it, man versus man is betrayal. So I think that's why it stings in a way that nature doesn't. Each person possesses the body, mind, and heart that constitute a detailed map of his own vulnerability. And so each person possesses an intimate understanding of the vulnerability of other people. Much of the suffering we inflict upon one another is completely over the top and unnecessary. So maybe the last war was always going to be man versus man. Nature simply places upon man the pressures necessary to reveal the best and worst in man. Maybe Jorah, Ed, Melisandre, and Lyanna are among those who showed us the best, and now it's time for the remainder to show us the worst. The others, being part nature and part man, apparently had a greater understanding of man's vulnerability than even man himself. Bran told us that the White Walkers were coming to burn the werewoods in order to erase the memories within, but the others didn't manage to destroy even one werewood, and there aren't any particularly valuable memories in the werewoods as far as we know. Maybe the stakes would have been higher if we left Jon Snow's parentage in the werewoods to be found or destroyed pending the results of the war. I think my expectation of the others, and perhaps the expectation of other people, was that the others, being part man and part nature, would be a threat more implacable than what man can usually produce, and more sinister than what nature can normally produce.